In the world of medicine, where every decision can change lives, your peace of mind is crucial. This is where Pattern steps in. Imagine insurance made simple, fast, and personalized, just for you. With Pattern, you're not just getting disability and life insurance, you're insuring your future and protecting your greatest asset, your income. In the past 10 years, Pattern has transformed the way over 20,000 doctors secure their financial well-being. Discover the simplicity of securing your future at patternlife.com or click the link in the description. Here's what every physician should know about the bird flu. Stay tuned. Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we have current events. Okay, so we're going to be talking about bird flu. And on today's episode, we have Dr. John Lieberman, who's board certified in internal medicine and infectious disease. He's been in practice for over 20 years, and he does a lot of medical expert witness work. And so please, he's going to show you how expert he is on the show today. And if you have any infectious disease expert witness work, please get in touch. You can find him on LinkedIn. That's how we got in touch. So Dr. Lieberman, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Brad, for inviting me on. Happy to be here.
So can you give us a brief history of H5N1? Because this is not the first time that bird flu has been an issue.
Correct. So I could even go a little bit bigger picture than that to give. So bird flu, it's a virus that lives in birds. As we're going to learn, it is now transmitted to other animals and to humans. This falls under the category of zoonosis, or an infection in animals that can also infect humans. And so we're going to talk about bird flu, but bear in mind, the bigger picture is that this is not a new concept at all. This goes back probably to the beginning of time when humans and animals were living in the same space together. Transmission of diseases from animals to humans. So bringing us fast forwarding now to more recent times, the first case that we know of, bird flu, that actually led to death was in 1997 and in China. Since then, there's multiple subtypes, so to speak. We were familiar with H5N1, which the H refers to hemagglutinin, which is a protein on the outside of the virus. The N is neuraminidase. So I don't want to get too technical here, but we're going to be throwing these letters and numbers around. So I just wanted to mention it because there's another bird flu. There's multiple other bird flu viruses that go by different other HN numbers. H7N9 is another common one that's been out there as well, but there are many others. And so worldwide, this H5N1 combination, it's estimated there's been between 900 and 1,000 cases worldwide since 1997, with an estimated mortality of about 52%. And H7N9, which is kind of the other big one, there's estimated to be over 1,500 cases of those.
A mortality of over 50%.
Correct.
In humans.
In humans.
Got it. Okay. Hey, who knew birds could get so many flus? It's been around a couple of times, but yet there have been, a couple of spikes over the years. We'd see a bunch of cases and then it would just disappear. Like for reasons unbeknownst to us, right? It would just it would be in the headlines and there'd be a bunch of cases among people. It would be spreading and then suddenly it would just evaporate. Correct?
Correct.
What's happening now? Well, let's just say what's happening now with this current spike in cases.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So first to qualify, sometimes they went away, sometimes they didn't. The first outbreak, for example, required the slaughtering, or they call it culling, of millions of animals. And that sometimes is what's required to end the outbreak. Sporadic cases occur here, as you pointed out, here and there. They kind of go away on its own. Part of the reason that is because it's very inefficiently transmitted between humans at this point in time. Animal to human in the setting of close contact, but so far it's very difficult to be transmitted from human to human. That's part of the reason why it hasn't spread to massive numbers.
Okay. Thankfully. Okay. So Wait a second. I'm a little confused about the culling because it's bird flu. Birds fly, right? So I can understand how they do it in cows, right? Because there are some cases right now in cows. You've got a herd. You can track the herd, like their property. This is the farmers know their cows, but you don't own, aside from like chickens, right? Like birds fly. How are you able to identify and cull the birds?
Right. So great question. Let me broaden the definition of a word bird. So we're not just talking about wildlife birds, which is ducks is where it's believed to be where it lives normally.
Okay. And actually,
However,
that sounds not as scary. So I think from a branding perspective, it was a good idea to refer to it as bird flu because calling it duck flu is just not as intimidating.
yeah, no, that's a good point. I can't take credit for naming
Yeah.
it, but bird also encompasses the birds which are bred for food. So
Okay.
chickens, turkeys, and the general class we call poultry, which is where many of the prior cases came from.
Got it.
You look it up, it's poultry workers in close contact with the chickens, which are in super tight confinement. They go in there to care for the animals or kill them. They get infected.
Got it. So it's the fact that we keep these animals in such close quarters that leads to its spread, not the fact that like a seagull gave it to a pigeon and then it's spreading from there. It's getting into one chicken, and because they live in such confined spaces, it's like most of them get it. And then from there, it can spread to whoever's caring for the human that's caring for those chickens.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, which maybe this will come up later, maybe not, but that's almost like a root cause of why there's so much potential for this to spread, to mutate, to get into humans. If you have, just imagine like now the big deal is it's never been discovered in cattle before. So there's a big difference if you just imagine in your head, you have a free range, free pasture cattle roaming about, they're independent, they're in a giant space. If one of them by chance gets infected, probably dies on its own, may not spread it. However, if you have 100,000 cattle in one facility lined up side by side and one of them gets infected, that's going to be potentially a different scenario.
That's really, from like an ethical perspective, it's really asking a lot of questions, right? It's really pointing out the flaws in how we treat other animals and how it comes back to get us.
Very well said. These animals were not designed for, putting aside ethical concerns. They weren't designed to be kept in close quarters like that. And what we're seeing is potential side effect playing out in nature and potentially spilling over into humans.
I mean, it reminds me of like Creutzfeldt-Jakob, right? Like you get these prion diseases when you feed the animals themselves, right? It's almost like Mother Nature letting us know that this is a problem.
Correct. I don't know how familiar you are with the mink outbreaks that are going on, but it's a very similar scenario. So we can divert briefly if that's okay with you.
Please. Yeah.
It's relevant. There have been multiple outbreaks on mink farms of the same highly pathogenic avian influenza. I mention it because in the wild, mink are pretty solitary, right? If one mink happens to come in contact with a bird, gets infected, it dies. However, the mink farming industry, very similar to the cattle industry, puts these animals in tight quarters. So they're highly stressed, which doesn't help their immunity, but the very tight quarters, and they get infected, they spread it to all the other minks, the minks die. And their transmission so far, kind of like what we've seen with cattle, it happens, but it's been inefficient and has not led to a pandemic thus far.
I did not realize that was still a thing. I mean, my mother and my grandmother used to have fur coats, but I cannot remember those fur coats probably were purchased before I was born. I did not realize that was even still a thing. So that's why people have mink farms, is for like mink coats, mink attire?
Exactly. They're farmed for their fur. And it's, as you pointed out, in this country, in some countries, it's become much less popular than it used to be because it's a horribly cruel industry, the way they're treated and raised. Would you like to speculate as to where the mink pelts are going.
I don't want to take a guess and offend anybody, so
No
please let me
worries.
know.
They're outside the United States. Let's just put it that way. Because
Yeah.
the demand here is so low, mink farms as a business have been decreasing. However,
Yeah.
there's still a market for them overseas, but not here in the US.
You know what? It makes me think also like the disease transmission in a school, right? So maybe this is Mother Nature telling us we should have free range children also, that we shouldn't be packing children in a classroom and having them spread disease to one another. We should get them outside more and have free range children.
Yeah, I never heard that before. That's an interesting topic. I am not qualified to speculate on how to improve education in this country, although that might be a topic for another day because I do have some ideas.
And I'd love to hear them. I'd love to hear them. Okay, so let's get back to the bird flu, not to be confused with the duck flu, but the bird flu. So you're saying the difference this time around is it has not, so previously it hasn't been found in cows, and now it is found in cows.
Correct. And it was one of the things that's important to point out, I think, as I've read more about it, as I've been following this all along, is that wasn't thought possible. So one of people, experts are surprised all the time. I've been humbled by that in my career. As you 20 plus years in, I find there's always something I don't know, always something I can learn. This surprised many experts in the veterinary world. They were looking for, well, who's the flu expert for cattle? And there wasn't one because it's a novel process, this avian flu infecting dairy cattle.
Now it's being spread from the cattle to the cattle workers,
Correct.
but then has it yet spread from a cattle worker to another human?
Not that we know of.
Okay, as of this, and this is being recorded on August 8th, we'll get the episode out soon so that it's still, timely. But as of this recording, we're not aware of any cases. So it's hard. So the thing that's saving us, the humans, because we're not the ones that are being culled, is that it's so hard. It doesn't spread so easily from human to human. From what I had read prior to this interview, it didn't seem like this has had the same amount of mortality. Like 50% mortality does not seem to be the case, at least when it's spread from cow to human. Is that true?
So the virus has changed. Oh, we call it mutate, right? So it mutates over time.
Yep.
Flu viruses do that. And I would have to double check, but there have been now a handful of cases. Last I checked in Colorado, there were 10 cases since May. And I don't think any of them died. I would have to double check that, but I think that's the case. And there's been a variety of disease. The common one you read about now is conjunctivitis, which was rare with prior reports of bird flu in humans. That was very uncommon. It was more common in the H7 and 9 strain. But to me, that's a little bit alarming. Okay, it's mutating, it's adapting, which we know happens. And as you pointed out, I'm not aware of cases human to human at this point. Experts, again, I'm not a virologist, so I don't know how to understand what they're talking about. And it's estimated that it's 2 mutations away, possibly more, from being able to develop that adaptability of higher transmission human to human.
It's the end of another busy day. You just saw 20, 30 patients, maybe more. Instead of heading home for dinner with your spouse or playing with your kids, you now begin your night job, charting. Charting is critical for patient care, billing, and medical legal liability, but it steals our focus from our patients, eats away at our time with our families, and keeps us up at night. The burden of always having another chart to complete drains all of us. Freed listens, prepares your notes, and writes patient instructions for you. Charting is done before your patient walks out of the room. Wait, because it gets better. Freed learns your style over time. It's AI, just like a human scribe would, except it will never quit on you. Freed is loved by 3,000 plus clinicians from every specialty. It's HIPAA compliant, takes 30 seconds to learn, and costs only $99 a month. You can try Freed for free right now by going to freed.ai, Freed.ai. Listeners of the Physician's Guide to Doctoring can use the code PGD50 for $50 off the first month. I mean, the conjunctivitis makes sense, right? Because if you're milking a cow and some sprays and it gets in your eye, like that's the portal of entry. So it, instead of getting in through the respiratory tract, it gets into the, conjunctival mucosa. So that makes sense to a non-expert like me. So one of my questions was going to be, should we be worried or when should we be worried? And the answer is yes, because we're 2 mutations away from what could potentially be a human pandemic. So, but let's go through, like, why should we be concerned about this?
That's a great question. Everyone has a different level of what causes them concern. There's a couple of things that make me concerned. One is the mortality rate. So think about COVID. Do you remember what the overall mortality rate was for COVID, which was a worldwide shutdown and pandemic?
It was like 0.1%.
Correct. Well less than 1%. So we're talking about, so that's what, 500 times the mortality rate if it's 0.1%, say.
Yeah.
So, if it gets to that point, it will be devastating. Not to diminish anyone who suffered from it by any means. If it affected you or you passed away from it, I've seen it personally. It's terrible. On a global picture, percentage-wise, it's small, especially compared to this 50% number. So I want to put that out there first. If it gets to that point, it's going to be startling. The other one is, as I've read about it more, experts in the field, virologists, epidemiologists, people who study this and live it day in, day out, they're alarmed. The official CDC statement now is the risk to the public is low, which is probably accurate because the transmission human to human so far has been extremely difficult, if not impossible. That's the official statement. When you read a little bit more about it on CDC website or published literature, there's a lot of concern out there, and I think that it's appropriate.
So it's in cows. They found it in the milk supply. So those who, all those raw milk people, beware, because you've got potential live virus in your milk supply. But for those of us who drink pasteurized milk, does the pasteurization process kill the virus?
That's what I've read. And that's the official statement from, I believe it's on the CDC site and elsewhere. Pasteurization kills the virus. They have, as it does kill many organisms, that's why they do the pasteurization in the first place. I've read that they've recovered virus from pasteurized milk, DNA. Supposedly it's non-viable.
So it's like finding evidence of humans in a cemetery.
Not bad.
Well, that's what I used with my patients when we were going through COVID. And they're like, well, sometimes the test is positive long after you're no longer infectious. What does it find? Well, it's finding evidence of DNA, but it's not, replicating virus. It's just pieces. What do you think about the status of our preparedness in terms of, I think our preparedness for a pandemic in terms of the dissemination of misinformation and the loss of faith in the healthcare system and vaccines. I'm not asking about that because, I think we can all glean from a moment on social media how unprepared we are in that regard. But from a, CDC preparedness, if this were to start spreading in humans, right? Let's say that those 2 mutations happen and suddenly it starts spreading in humans. How prepared are we for that?
So that's hard to assess for me. As a clinician, I would like to think that the CDC is going to be there for us if and when that happens. And I know that there's many really smart, hardworking people there, and they're doing, as far as I can tell, they're doing everything they can in the kind of their silo of what they have the ability to control in the healthcare system. As far as I understand, their jurisdiction does not extend to helping out with the animal side of it, which is huge. So in terms of what they're doing now, it seems like they're taking appropriate steps. Their website is great with plenty of information on it for anyone who wants to read it. The communicability, transparency is there. They are testing a certain percentage of samples randomly, as well as tracking ER visits for influenza-like illness or ILI, looking for spikes as kind of an initial cause for concern. The screening that they've done on influenza so far has not detected outside of what the handful of cases that we've had so far. They are licensing out production of a vaccine. And should this become the pandemic that it has the potential to be, and they have information on their website for clinicians about basic stuff like taking a good history on your patient, which is something ID doctors do living in the world of zoonosis, but maybe not everyone is not aware of it. If your patient comes in with an influenza-like illness, you don't ask if they work on a poultry farm or a dairy cattle farm. That's a big deal now. A year ago, it may not have been. So the information is out there. I feel like given their mission, their purpose, the CDC seems to have, they're clearly well aware of it and the potential of it. And it seems like they're acting in the public best interest as they're supposed to be.
The thing that gives, and correct me if I'm wrong here, right? I'm an otolaryngologist, but neither of us are virologists or immunologists. Like the way the current flu vaccine works, it's not a sterilizing vaccine, right? It kind of limits mortality from the flu, right? The seasonal flu vaccine that we all get. It's not a great vaccine. It's not really super effective. And so if that's what we're working with for something that has at baseline a 50% mortality, man, if it makes it down to a 25% mortality, that would be amazing, but it would still be extraordinarily devastating. So, that kind of gives me pause with regards to the state of, and if they do have a vaccine, it's going to be against the variant that wasn't spreading human to human, because once it starts spreading human to human, it's a different variant. It might not be effective. And now they've got to identify it, test it, study it, produce it. It's an argument for going vegan here.
Yeah. Like we were playing catch up with COVID, right? COVID mutated a few times, Delta, Omicron. There were multiple strains and the vaccines were constantly playing catch up. The big difference is the mortality rate. So it's not nearly as severe as what we're dealing with. You get at a point though, that I think is a good one, is that even if we had a vaccine today, based on the current strain, that would help. There's no doubt, just like the influenza vaccine reduces mortality, it mitigates illness. A vaccine that was effective would help. Would it help enough? I think that's up for debate.
Yeah. We'll see. A big we'll see. So let's say you were at a cocktail party and one of your friends came up to you and said, Dr. Lieberman, you're an infectious disease doctor. I keep reading about this bird flu. What should I know about it? So I want you to give me like the elevator pitch, version of what we just talked about in case someone comes up to one of us and has the same question.
Yeah. So I would say that bird flu is the current iteration in a long history of zoonoses, or humans getting infected from animal disease. And at the current time, the risk to humans is low. It's very hard to get from human to human, if not impossible. However, the answer is not for shutting it down and or managing when it happens is not obvious to me, short a bigger coordination from authorities. It's a disease in animals now. And the CDC, which is, again, and someone perhaps will correct me, but I do not think their authority extends to managing disease in animals or taking steps to prevent it from getting to humans. They're managing the human side of it as best they can to protect us. I think until we have a more global ability to respond, I've seen the word silos used, which I'm going to mention again. The USDA is separate from the Fish and Wildlife Service, is separate from the FDA, is separate from the CDC, but yet they all potentially have a role to play in this.
Yeah.
And that worries me a bit, that there's not the coordination which I would like to see. And I think other authorities have written about something like that. That was a kind of a long elevator pitch. My bad.
Nope. I appreciate it though. And it's a great way to close and a great way to sum it up. And I'm just going to throw this out there that in 1997, when the first case was reported, it was near a lab that was doing gain of function research. I'm just kidding. I just made that up. I just made this.
Well, I didn't read that.
Well, Dr. Lieberman, thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. This was really, really enlightening, and will keep, help us keep, as physicians, as the community leaders with regard to healthcare, keep us up to date on what's going on. So I appreciate you taking your time out.
Thank you very much.
Doctors dedicate our lives to caring for others. It's time someone took care of us. Visit patternlife.com to simplify your path to peace of mind. Patternlife.com, simplifying your insurance journey. Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it, or like it, or comment on a social media post, or write us a 5-star review. Something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee, and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice, or financial advice, or really any advice. Thanks again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.